Hi, this is Rock. We're going to learn about columns and rows and sheets today, mainly about how to select, modify, hide, and group those things. So what is a column? Your columns are across the top here. So in this setting of Excel, they're all numbered with alphas, and it goes up. When it gets to the end of the alphabet, it starts at AA, goes on. As I've said before, when you get to AZ, goes to BA, and on all the way up through the very far right goes to XFD. So we've got a lot of columns to choose from here, but we have even more rows when it goes down all the way to 1,048,576. That's a lot of cells. So how do we select cells and ranges and columns and rows? The best way to select a column is to hover above the column you want to select and then click on that particular column header. Your cursor turns into this downward pointing arrow when you're in position that if you click, it will select it. Over here, your cursor turns into a rightward pointing arrow when it's in a position to select a row. As you cross the threshold from one cell to another, your cursor changes to this up-down arrow cursor, which means now you're in a position to change the height of the row. In this case, it would be the height of row 4 if I selected and dragged. So same thing when you're going to the right across the columns. As you go from H to I, your cursor shifts to this right-left arrow, which means that if you click now, you're in a position to change the width of column H. So the width changing is done by the right border of the column heading or the bottom border of the row heading. So on this side is the row heading, and across the top are the column headings. To select multiple columns, there are a few ways to do this. You can hold your mouse button down and drag across to select the ones that you want. You can select the first one you want and then hold Shift and select the last one you want, and it'll select all those in between. If you want to select non-contiguous columns, you can select one and then hold Control, select another, hold Control and select a few as you drag, continue holding Control and select the other ones that you want. So you can select non-contiguous columns. Columns can be configured and rows to have a certain width or height. You can choose that by clicking and dragging, or you can right click and say column width and then type in how wide you want that to be. If you have text in your cell and you want to automatically adjust to that width, double click on the right border of the column heading and it will auto fit for the text that you have. You can do that with multiple cells. So if I have this over here, multiple places, and I select them, I can double click here and it will make all of them, I call it justified, but it's best fit actually. And if I've made these, I'm going to select those by holding Control and then clicking on them. And if I use my icon for wrap text, now if I select these and make each of these columns that width, then not all the text is displaying. So I can double click on the bottom of the row heading border to auto size that. The thing that I said about selecting columns, you can do the same thing, of course, for rows. Holding Control, selecting the columns that you want. Another thing you can do with rows and columns is hide them. So if I have columns or rows selected and I right click on the heading, I can choose to hide. So that just hid the rows I had selected between 7 and 14, between 18 and 20, between 27 and 29, and between 32 and 34. To re-show those, I could hit undo, but I could also select up here, this is the select all button, and then I can right click here and say unhide, and it'll unhide all those. Same thing for columns. You can choose a certain number, right click, and then say hide. And if you want to unhide, it doesn't do it just by clicking any of these columns. You have to select the ones that you particularly want to unhide by selecting the ones on either side of them, then right click and click unhide. I'm going to make these different colors so that you can see what I'm working on here, because I want to make a point about copying and pasting. You can cut, which is Control X. You can cut a column and then paste it by right-clicking somewhere else and say Insert Cut Cells. You can also click the whole column, and then when you hover over the top of the column, see how your cursor changes to the multi-directional cursor? You can select that and then just drag it to the place that you want. You can do that for multiple cells at once. If you get that cursor to change, you can move them. If you do this and see how it says there's already data here, do you want to replace this? See how that selection that I had, and by dragging it, it's showing I want to put those over top of those columns. I'm going to cancel and say no, because I don't want to overwrite that existing column. If what I was trying to do is move those, then when you move, if you hold the Shift key, it will tell you where you can insert those to. So now when I let go of it, because I was holding the Shift key, it put it in between those cells as if it were a cut and a insert versus a paste over. That's the same case for rows that you are wanting to move. You can take a particular row and just hover to have this be movable, and see how I've got a row's worth of thickness saying I'm going to overwrite. But if I hold Shift, it says I'm going to insert it there. Rows and columns have a relationship in that there's an intersection between every one of these columns and every one of these rows. And those relationships are defined by the cells. So this cell is O2 because it's column O and row 2. So you see how over here, once I have that selected, in the name box, it's telling me this is O2. So if I want to get to P10, I can select the name box and type P10, and it'll take me there. Another thing that you can do with references is create a reference inside the cell. So if I say equals M7, it will take the value that's in M7 and present it where I'm typing, which in this case is O8. So it took the text from there, not the formatting of it. And then I can ask the question up here in O4, I can say, does O8 equal M7? So it's saying, does this equal that? And if I hit enter, it says that that's true because they both say the same thing. And if I click inside the formula bar, you see how over here it's showing the O8 as being blue and the letter M7 as being red. That's helpful for me to see where it's pointing to. Let's go over here and say, if I change that, then I can ask the question, does this equal that? And you notice how instead of typing O8, I just clicked on the cell. So I'm going to do that again, O8, and then does it equal D7? So I'm just going to click on D7, and you see how the red color corresponds to the reference here in the cell. If I click inside the cell, it pulls that color here. So wherever I'm doing the editing, it's the same thing, and it gives me the color reference. And if I hit enter, it says false because these are not equal. The point, though, being that every cell has an address, a cell address, and that address is the intersection between the column and the row. Notice that the address reference is always given first by the column and then by the row. So it's column, then row in any address. You may think of Excel as a two-dimensional program, and in a lot of ways it is, but it actually can be as many dimensions as you want, because you can take this two-dimensional aspect and multiply it in any dimension you want, because you can take a copy of this sheet. Let's just right-click and copy, and I'm going to make a copy of that and move it to the end. I'm going to say OK. The default is that it names it sheet 1 again, but gives it a parentheses of a 2 to say that there are 2 named this. So these are sheets referred to as worksheets or sheets. The tab here that allows you to click on it to access the sheet, these are called tabs, just like from a filing system. You can rename a sheet. Right click, rename. I'm going to say third dimension. And that's because columns and rows are the 2 dimensions you can start with, but you can add a third or a fourth or a fifth dimension to your data by having separate sheets. Now I've just copied the sheet. You can have different data in here. Let me say in this one, and now I've got, make that a little easier to see here by making that white. And now I've got a different sheet than this one. And let's ask another question. Let's say, does this equal, and then I'm going to jump to this other sheet and click on that. And when I hit enter, it should say false because I've modified this one. The modification that Excel cares about is not the color of the text. Excel looks at the value of the cell as opposed to its formatting when it determines if something is equal to another one. Notice that when I created this comparison, does G7 equal G7, that I've got this sheet 1 and then an exclamation point and then G7. You see here that the reference to this other cell, G7, that is local, does not need the prefix of third dimension and the exclamation point. It just says G7. But if you go to another sheet in your reference, you need to tell Excel that you're looking at another sheet, which you do by indicating with this exclamation point. So this is the key to get to another sheet. So let's try that here by going to sheet 1 and saying equals, and I'm going to go to the third dimension sheet and click on this, and you see how it automatically put in there third dimension for me and then the cell reference. And that brought over the value that was in third dimension. Now that I've changed this in I7 of the third dimension sheet, and I come back to this first sheet, you see how it shows what I changed. If I come back here and add another word and come back, you see that it's keeping up with it. Using the equal sign makes that cell a reference to the cell you have referred to by its cell address. We'll learn more about creating references to other cells. It's an extremely valuable aspect of Excel that you can use any cell and refer to other cells, that you can do comparisons. It's an extremely powerful aspect of Excel. The next thing I want to show is grouping. I'm going to create another sheet here, and note you can move sheets around just by dragging them. I'm going to call this grouping. We're going to do some grouping here. Let's say I've got all right. So if I want to group these cells in the same way that in Microsoft Word you can do outlining, the way to do that in Excel is by grouping. And you may have noticed that I kind of skipped over these icons quickly when we were doing the icon survey. But here we are. let's get into them. What does it mean to group rows in this case? Because I have rows selected, I'd like to group them. I can click here and group them. And the default you see is to group it with the hierarchy being underneath. So if I close this group and open it, this plus and minus sign to hide and unhide my group is underneath. Typically, when I do organizations and hierarchies in Excel with the data, typically what I'm working with is data that I have with the hierarchy being above the row, not below it, or to the left of it if it's a column, not to the right of it. The reason Excel's default setting has it below is that that's the way you would do it for a lot of accounting situations in creating accounting spreadsheets, and Excel really began as an accounting application. So what I'm going to do here is go to the group and outlines settings. I usually come here on every spreadsheet and deselect these and say OK. And what that does is it puts the grouping for all the groups that we create with, if I group rows, it has the group heading at the top. If I group columns, it has the group heading on the left. So I'm going to take these, select these, and now I'm going to click on group. And then I'm going to select these, and I'm going to click group. So now these are grouped in ways that I can hide and show these groups just by clicking on these headings over here, the plus and the minus. A fast way to hide them all is to click on the 1 over here for the grouping. And a fast way to show them all is to click on the 2. So the same thing can happen if you have another set of groupings over here. And then let's have, okay. Now, if I want to group these, I can do the same thing. I can select the columns, click group, and it creates this group up here now for that. So I can select these columns, group those, select these, and group those. Let me say I accidentally selected and grouped the wrong ones. I could click ungroup. So ungroup is that icon, group is this icon. I'm going to group those. And now again, I can click this one up here to group all those. I can click this one to group those. I can expand individual ones or close them, or I can expand them all by clicking the 2's there. And let's say I find another level in my hierarchy. I'm going to select these rows and right click and hit insert. So I'm going to insert some rows here, and I'm going to put in another hierarchy here where I have. And if I group these by clicking this group icon over here, now I can also display or hide those with this. But notice how now I have 3 levels. And over here, the same thing. If I'm going to add, I can right click and insert. And here, I'm just pretending to create hierarchy here. And let me group those. And see how it added another group here that I can show and hide. And now I have 3 on each side. You can create hierarchies here that, depending on your data, can be very useful. In terms of selecting, modifying, etc. at the sheet level, you can select multiples by holding Control and selecting the other ones. You can also select one and then hold Shift and select another one, and it'll select that and everything in between. So that's how you can select multiple sheets. When you right click on a tab of a sheet, it gives you a number of options, including, as I showed you, move or copy. You can also delete or rename. You can insert a new sheet here, which is the same as clicking that plus sign. If you do it here, it'll insert that sheet here instead of at the very end. So that's handy. You can change the tab color. You can choose a particular color here, and that can be helpful. You can select all the sheets, but note that you can also hide the sheets. So I'm going to click hide here and it is gone. It is not showing up. If I right click on this, it's not even in this list to activate. The only way I can show it again is click here and click unhide, and then here one at a time I can unhide sheets that are hidden. So we have covered selecting, modifying, hiding, and grouping for columns and rows and sheets. We've talked about references and how references work within a sheet and then also across into other sheets. These are very basic and important, just absolutely critical skills to have as you move forward and learn how Excel works. Next, we're going to take a deeper dive on freezing panes and windows. See you there.